Welcome to Advocata podcast. My name is Dhananath Fernando. We are joining today actually from the Reform Now conference, and we are launching the podcast series. And I have two distinguished guests to discuss today on Buddhism and economics, and also to discuss about how economics and Buddhism and how can we relate it to the crisis, and how can we basically have those ideology and the framework to overcome the crisis, but to understand mainly about Buddhism and economics. Welcome, Dr. W.A Wijewardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for joining the podcast, Dr. Wijewardena. And I have Dr. Veerathai Santiprabhob, the former Governor of the Bank of Thailand. Thank you, Dr. Santiprabhob, for joining with us.
Thank you for having me. Delighted.
Dr. Wijewardena, let me start with you. Now, in Sri Lanka and Thailand, both have strong connections with Buddhism. In your view, you have been a great reader, a writer. What is Buddhism and what is economics, and how do you relate these two? Is there a connection or is there a contradiction?
Well, Dhananath, there's a connection between Buddhism and economy, because the objective of the economy is to improve the well-being of the people. The objective of Buddhism is also to help people to attain their final salvation. So therefore, the final objective of both the economics and Buddhism are one and the same. And as a result, the Buddha had preached many discourses during his time, which are highly relevant to day-to-day economics, as well as what we now know as macroeconomics. And as a result, any current policymaker or political leader can make use of the findings from the discourses of the Buddha to help the country to resolve their economic issues. That is because Dhananath, Buddha was born at a time when India had a very vibrant and dynamic economic system. And 200 years after the Buddha, there was this Kautilya who had written the first treatise on economics called the Arthashastra. So what Kautilya has said in his Arthashastra, and the many discourses in which Buddha has preached about the livelihood of people, we find that they are all common to the present economic problems, and what we find as main economic principles that we teach at schools today, they have been known to the Buddha even at that time. One example is there is this Chakravarti Sihanada Sutra in the Anguttara Nikaya, in which the Buddha had said that there was a king who had found that there were people who were robbing at that time. Lots of incidents of robberies and theft. And when he asked his advisor, the advisors had advised him, okay, people are stealing mainly because they don't have livelihood. So what the king did was, king had opened his treasury and given free money to those people. And then people have realized if they steal more, they can get more money from the king. So instead of the theft going down, the thefts have gone up, which we are teaching to students today as the moral hazard problem. So that particular problem had been known to even the Buddha and the Buddha's time. There are many others which I can refer to later in the discussion. This is one of the examples. So to answer your question, Buddhism and economy are interrelated, and they can find solutions to economic problems.
Thank you, Dr. Wijewardena, for a great start. Dr. Veerathai, if I ask you the same question, because especially in your region, the region that you are coming from, there's Theravada Buddhism and also there's Mahayana Buddhism. How do you see Buddhism, and how do you see the connection between Buddhism and economics? And what's your view on that, Dr. Veerathai?
Thank you, Dhananath. I'm in full support to what Professor Wijewardena talked about the objectives of the two science or two subjects, two guiding principles, if I may call. Obviously, both Buddhism and economics have the same objectives of promoting the well-being of the people. And indeed, I believe that understanding of Buddhism can help the science of modern economics be more healthy indeed. Once we understand the fundamental truth of life as preached by the Lord Buddha, we would understand what actually life is and what's the importance in life, and that will have big implications on how we come to we arrive at the value of whatever we do, whatever we consume, whatever we buy. Economics is a subject of giving value to things and using value in resource allocations. By having a good understanding of Buddhism, it will help you cultivate the right value in guiding your life, in guiding the way you conduct your business, in guiding the way you do whatever ways of life that you do. The other reflections, if I may, if you look at modern economics nowadays, when you look at resource allocation and how we generate a value of things, a value of our resources. In my view, modern economics seems to concentrate on the supply side, on the production, trying to meet what it has been assumed as unlimited demand, and if you can do whatever on the supply side to be able to produce as much, to be able to satisfy whatever is demanded, then modern economics seems to suggest that that's a better value, that's a higher value that we should achieve. But Buddhism, in my view, focuses on the demand side, questioning a lot on how you arrive at the demand of whatever you do, how you value everything that you do. If the demand can be understood in more detail, can be related to the objectives of your own well-being and the social well-being. When you translate that demand into value and linking up with the resource allocation using economic science, I'm certain that a lot of economics problems can be decided, which a much healthier approach, and we can deal with a lot of problems that we think are unintended consequences of modern economics nowadays.
Thank you, Dr. Veerathai. Dr. Wijewardena, I want to take that question forward. Now, in Buddhism, one of the main concepts is minimalism. And it often talks about, as Dr. Veerathai mentions, he feels it's more on managing the demand side. So how does this go hand in hand with economics? Because in economics, we speak about adding value for people's life, that is right. And of course, improving the quality of people's life. So to do that, they have to consume. And how do you explain these two concepts?
Well, of course, while agreeing with Dr. Veerathai, there are lots of discourses preached by the Buddha which would tell us about the supply side as well. If you take the Singalowada Sutra, Dhananath, it actually gives us the solution to today's Sri Lanka's economic problem. In the Singalowada Sutra, Buddha has advised the young boy Singalaka, the income that he earns has to be split into 4 parts. 1 part should be used for his own consumption. The second part he has to save for future emergencies. The third part he has to use for earning more revenue in the future, which we call investment today. The fourth part he has to spend, in fact, for the benefit of his children, the learned people, the monks, and so forth. So what it means is that if you take from the today's vocabulary that we use in economics, Dhananath, 50% of the income has to be saved. Only 50% has to be consumed for his use as well as the use by the relatives and other people. Now, out of the 50%, 25, because since there were no banks at that time, 25% was saved with him. The balance 25% he had invested. But in today's terminology, Dhananath, if we can save 50% of our income and invest 50% of our income, we can come out of the present economic crisis in Sri Lanka very easily. Because today, there has been an overheating of the economy because of the high aggregate demand. And as a result, the inflation is, picking up. But if you take a country like Singapore from around, say, to 1965, from the independence onward, their savings ratio had been well above 50%. Even if you take China today, it's about 40%. And India, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, the savings ratios have been about 30 to 40%. So what it means is that compared to Sri Lanka's today's savings ratio of say 20%, because out of every 100 rupees that we earn Dhananath, 80 rupees we consume and we save only 20%. In the case of our government, which is a notorious dis-saver, instead of saving, it makes a dis-saving. There's a gap in the revenue account of the government of 2 to 3%, but of course after the drop in the revenue due to the tax concession given by the previous Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration, the deficit in the revenue account has now gone up to 7 to 8% of GDP today. So if we follow the Buddha's the advice correctly, if we cut down our consumption drastically from say 80% today to say 60% or 65%, we are actually generating sufficient domestic savings in order to make investments. Now, many people are critical of Sri Lanka for borrowing abroad, and we have to borrow abroad than not because we have a huge savings investment gap. Our savings are about 20%, investment requirements are about 30%. So the balance 10% has been filled by Sri Lanka throughout the post-independence history by using the savings of the people outside Sri Lanka. So that is why we have to borrow from abroad. Now, people are, I think in the morning also, I think President Ranil Wickremesinghe had referred to the fact that Sri Lanka is a deep debt crisis. Now, for him to resolve the deep debt crisis, one way is to increase the savings, cut down the government expenditure, increase the government revenue, convert the government dis-savings to a savings, and force people to save more, cut down their consumption. And as a result, gradually we will be able to take Sri Lanka out of the dependence on the foreign borrowings. So this particular Singalavada Sutra is, in my view, is a basic macroeconomic picture that is given to us. So we will have to follow it. And therefore, I will give some other examples later than that, but of course, this is one of the good things that we have to do today.
Thank you, Dr. Wijewardena. But Dr. Veerathai, just wanted to understand on the concept of minimalism, but you added a very important point in your very initial answer that economics is all about adding value to something, and you understand that value. When value necessarily is not the price, it's what you really add to it, and resource allocation from the same resource. How can you utilize optimally is all about. And even in Buddha's in character and in his living, he showed like how minimalistic, and he also added a lot of value even on his in consumption. How do you connect these two with the modern economics, and how should countries and the leaders and their policymakers should see it on those contexts?
You touch on a very important word, optimization, which means that it's not quantity game. It's not one way directions that you have more quantities is always better utility or better satisfaction. Optimizations require some kind of trading off between different objectives and subject to whatever constraints that you're facing. As I mentioned earlier, that when I try to relate Buddhism and economics, I see that modern economics give very little weight on understanding how value is generated. That's how I say that Buddhism concentrates more on the value, how you give value, and that's leading to the demand side. So we need to have a better understanding on the value determination system of individuals and also of the society. There's these wrong assumptions in my view that economics is always quantity game. When you have more and you generate more welfare, that's not the case. And this brings me to recollections of two principles. The first one is a question often asked by His Holiness Dalai Lama. If you read His Holiness books, He asks whether, when you want something, is that need or greed? I think it's a very short question, but it has a very, very important implication on how you value things. Okay? If you think it's need, is necessity for life, that there's certain objectives of meeting that requirement. But if it is driven by greed, okay, that could also lead to exploitation of your own self, or exploitation of people surrounding you, exploitations of the society at large. Once you can differentiate between the two types of desires, whether it's need or greed, I think it will have a lot of effects on your behavior. And people who appreciate minimalism, I think they have gone through that process. They have realized what they actually need and whether it's a need or greed. The other concept that has been given to the Thai people post 1997 economic crisis is the economic sufficiency economic principle given by His late Majesty King Bhumibol. And he emphasized on three core principles. The first one is the principle of moderation. The second one is reasonableness, making sure that whatever you do, everything you do, it has full rationales and it's full reasons to do it. And the third one is the concepts of immunity, making sure that there is immunity at the household level, immunity at the country level, and all these principles of moderation, immunity, and reasonableness have to be based on the foundations of good ethics and knowledge. That's the basics of sufficiency economic principles, and that's very much related to the stories, the teaching about savings that the professors talk about, and to come up to these sufficiency economic principles. I think that the two dimensions which I would like to highlight. One is that it's each person has to decide for his or her own self, okay, what is considered sufficient for him or for her. There is no one basic formula, because each person is different. The context is different. The family requirements is different. The livelihood is very different. But making sure that you know how to stay sufficient in the sense that you don't exploit your own self and you don't exploit the society or people surrounding you. That's the fundamental of moderation. The second thing, which I think is very much related to concept of Buddhism, to be able to understand and crystallize the problems of the Asian financial crisis, the Thai financial crisis, into this basic sufficiency economic principle. His late Majesty must have a very good understanding of Buddhism. And all of this has to start from sufficiency at heart, to be mindful of the needs, mindful of one's own behavior, to be able to come to the principles of moderation and sufficiency. So it goes back to the demand side. It goes back to how you determine value, and that value determination system would have implications on your behaviors and on your action. So if you try to relate this to minimalism, doesn't mean worsening off. It could be a better, a more satisfied positioning, more satisfied equilibrium for someone who has decided to follow that path of moderation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Veerathai. Dr. Wijewardena, I want to ask now, in Buddhism, one of the main concepts is that the battle is inside you. You can conquer the world, but for you to liberate yourself, it's conquering yourself. That was one of the fundamental concepts in Buddhism. And Lord Buddha's, in his life, he basically speaks about it quite a lot. So how do you see this? Because I think in Buddhism, you're basically looking towards you, and you're thinking about your thoughts, your speech, your words, and your action. Samma Vacha, Samma Sati. So basically, how do you see it with economics, like the importance of conquering yourself, but of course, but making it an impactful life for others, that they will also prosper and progress. How do you see these two with Buddhism and economics?
Well, of course, I think Dr. Veerathai pronounced it as moderation. Now, moderation is actually the middle path which was preached by the Buddha. And he said that both the self-immolation and also luxuriousness are not the way a person will have to conquer this world. He has to go by the middle path. In that context, there is a very important principle which had been preached by the Buddha, which he said, if we want to attain nirvana, which is the final objective of Buddhism, we have to follow the path called alobha, adosha, amoha. Alobha means non-greed, adosha means non-hatred, amoha means non-delusions. What it means is, Dhananath, that the two other extremes, lobha, dosha, moha, that means greed, hatred and delusion, or which are negative sentiments. At the same time, the positive sentiments, even the opposite of lobha is, generosity. Opposite of, hatred is, giving everything, in love. Of course, the opposite of, delusion is knowledge. Buddha said, both paths are highly dangerous for a person. That's why I always, when I teach my students, I will say that negative thinking is also wrong. Positive thinkings are equally wrong. What you have to do is you have to come for the moderation. You have to be in the middle path, because both, if you have the positive thinking, Dhananath, what will happen is it will give you a self-ego, which is not, possessed by you, and you will do lots of dangers to yourself as well as to the people around you. If you have negative thoughts, Dhananath, what would happen is that you will get depressed and you withdraw from the world and you are not of service to the people. So what matters to us is to be in the middle path, and therefore neither negative nor positive thinking is, preached by the Buddha. What we have to go for is the middle path. That is what Dr. Veerathai said as moderation, which is actually the way to conquer oneself, as you have said, which is actually resolving the problems of the world by resolving your own problems first, so that you will be able to expand it to the rest of the world. Now, for example, if we take Sri Lanka's present economic crisis, Dhananath, if we can constrain our own demand, constrain our own consumption today, and if we stop, our luxurious lifestyles that we had been used to in the past, and if we do so today, what we do is we help the central bank to cut the aggregate demand. Now, central bank has great difficulty in cutting the aggregate demand by increasing the interest rates even to 30% than today. Still, the inflation is rising at 70% with 30% interest rate. But if we can, as Dr. Veerathai has very correctly said, if we moderate ourselves, if we cut down our own aggregate demand, because the aggregate demand is made up, Dhananath, of the aggregation of the individual demands of the people. So if all of us, go by the Buddha's, words, moderate ourselves, cut down our own demand, the aggregate demand will be lower. The job of the governor of the central bank will be much easier.
Thank you, Dr. Wijewardena. Since I have two very well experienced central bankers, I wanted to understand how the principles applied in central bank, how do you see it with Buddhism at the same time? Because central banks have that monopoly or the ability to print money, or like giving people the power of buying something through the notes with that sentimental value. I don't think I would ever meet someone would qualify to answer this question than you two. What are your thoughts, Dr. Veerathai, on the central banker's role with Buddhism?
The central bank doesn't have unlimited power to print money. I have to correct you on that front first. Indeed, the central bank has to follow the principle of middle path. The main functioning or main objective of central banks is to create stability. I think that's the most important thing. Whether it's a price stability, controlling inflation, financial stability, and in the world that we have many complex trade-offs that we have to deal with when making policies. I think the principles of middle path is very important. That's how I look at when I serve as the governor as the Bank of Thailand, making sure that we to create immunity for the economy as a whole. We need to make sure that we not conduct any policies that is extreme. So the concept of moderation is also there, making sure that we understand all the risks involved in making policy decisions, and we make sure that given the different constraints that we have at the macro level of a country, how can we look at stability on a long-term basis, and making sure that we not take or go into one direction that would create too much risks for the economy. That may be on a macro concept at the policy level. If you may recall, there is a famous saying by one chairman of the Federal Reserve, who said that a job of the central bank is to take the punch bowl away when the party is about to get going. Okay. I think that has a very important implications on how we conduct central banking in today's world. When you see that there's a lot of speculations, activities in financial markets, a lot of overheating signals, over investments, over borrowing, too little saving. Okay. It is the role of the central bank to look ahead and take action. And these actions might not be appreciated by people in the society, because obviously, when there is a bubble, whether it's asset price bubble or stock price bubble, people seem to enjoy it during the beginning phase of the bubble. Only when the bubbles get bursted and people would come back and ask, the central bank, why didn't you do anything 3 years or 5 years ago? So central banks has to incorporate, central bankers have to incorporate, these principles of moderation into policy decisions, into the conduct of policies, looking ahead, with all the risk scenarios involved, and trying to make sure that we create stability today and also stability in the future. That's very important. That's the long lens that we have to wear. At the individual level, at the personal level, I think Buddhism is also very important as a guiding principle for central bankers. Central bankers always stand in conflicts of interest, conflicts of benefits. When interest rates goes up, depositors enjoy it. Borrowers don't like it. When the currencies devalues, exporters enjoy it, but importers would complain about it, criticize the central banks very heavily. To be able to make policy decisions that's the best for the country, that's optimum for the countries, central bankers need to have neutral state of mind, unbiased state of mind, to be able to make the right policy decisions. If central bankers start, calculating, what I will get, how much influence that I have to fight back with, what will be implications on my own self, as opposed to the effects on the economy as a whole or the society as a whole, then you end up having a very biased policy decisions, which could be very harmful for the economy. So I guess as someone who has started mindfulness meditation, mindfulness practice has helped me tremendously in my job, in previous job as a central banker, and also my other jobs that basically provide a foundations for me to cultivate the stage of neutrality in my mind without having positive or even negative or even positive attitudes that could lead to biased decision.
Thank you, Dr. Veerathai. So just to summarize what we discussed so far. So we discussed about the view with Buddhism and economics and how it has to be optimally managed, and how about adding value is one of the main concepts in Buddhism, and at the same time how the central bankers has to think with when it comes to Buddhism and the principles of central bank. Dr. Wijewardena, Dr. Veerathai mentioned about the role of the central bank and how central bank should think in the middle path, especially during times like this, but not only during times like this, but throughout the financial system management. How do you see? He's coming from a Thailand and East Asian background. You have been in Sri Lanka and at the central bank in Sri Lanka. So how do you see, in our context as a central banker, Buddhism versus central banking?
Well, Dhananath, I will draw your attention to Dr. Veerathai's this punch bowl example. When the punch bowl is supplied by the central bank, the governor is the most loud person in the country. But when he pulls back the punch bowl, he will become the most hated man. So that is because, Dhananath, in the case of a central banker, he knows the interconnectedness of the different sections and the units of the economy, interdependence of these units, and as a result, when he takes any policy measure, he will have to look at the impact, not only the most recent impact, but also the impact which would be there over a period of time across the whole economy. Now, there's a good story about this in Buddhism, Dhananath. The story relates to Prince Siddhartha, and King Suddhodana, his father, had asked the princess of Sakya clan, "Do you know how we get rice?" Then one of the princes had said, "Okay, when I sit at the golden table, the rice comes to my golden plate." Then another prince had said, no, rice doesn't come to your golden plate. It shall be served to your golden plate with a bowl, silver bowl. The third one has said, no, it doesn't come to a silver bowl. The rice comes from a copper cauldron in the kitchen, and there it is brought there. So what it means is that none of these people had known exactly the operation of the rice there. And that is the central bank job. Central bank knows how it is. Then it is, according to the story, it's only Prince Siddhartha who has said, in such and such village, there are people who wake up early in the morning, they go to paddy fields, they till the paddy. They use the plows which have been made by the blacksmiths in such and such village. To make the plows, those blacksmiths get the iron which had been mined by the people in such and such village. And those irons have been carried by the carters, where the carts have been constructed by the carpenters in such and such village. And the bulls that have pulled the carts, they have been fed by the grass that had been cut and grown in such and such village. So it was actually Prince Siddhartha who had given the whole picture of the connectedness and the interdependence of the market. Central bank governors knows this. That's the difference between a central bank governor and an ordinary person, ordinary politician, even the president of the republic. He may not know about it. So that's why they make decisions, Dhananath, just looking at what they see on their nose. They can't see beyond their nose. So it is therefore necessary for the political authorities, the other people in the country, to listen to a governor. That's why when a governor speaks, Dhananath, it carries a long weight. Now, I know I have worked with 7 governors in the central bank, and people like, say, the late W.A Wijewardena, Dr. Veerathai Santiprabhob, when they speak, the whole market takes it, very, seriously. That's because the governors don't speak very often. When they speak by using the most appropriate vocabulary, and they don't want to, support one person against the other person, and that is why they are hated throughout. But fortunately, as the deputy governor, Dhananath, I was not hated. Only governors are hated. The deputy governors are, insulated from that particular hatred.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Wijewardena. Before I move on to the next question, I want to ask Dr. Veerathai and both Dr. Wijewardena, since uh, being a governor is such a responsible position, as Dr. Wijewardena said, that one statement or one decision can go a long way. How do you personally, I'm asking sort of a personal question, how do you actually keep that psychological balance and to make sure that you see the things in the middle path, and to make sure that you're not deviating either side? Because you should, I think, have to also do a self check, because when you're drifting towards one side, you also don't know as individuals that you're drifting towards a side. So that psychological balance and that self awareness and making sure that you are in the middle path it's a difficult thing to do, in my view. How do you manage it, especially you have overcome through the in the East Asian financial crisis? Could you shed some light to our viewers? How do you do it, and some tips that what you actually practice, so then people can also understand to see things, as Dr. Wijewardena said, not what you see just before your nose, but throughout, with a long lens.
I think this goes back to the basic teaching of Lord Buddha, that life is basically about body and mind and the interaction between the two. But it's the fact that for most people, when we grow up, we have learned a lot about how to take care of our own physical body without paying sufficient attention on how to take care of your mind, your state of mind. And that's when vipassana meditation came in my case. It's just the same as if you have to do physical exercise to make sure that you have physical strength to deal with whatever exhaustions or burden on your physical body that you have to deal with. You also need to do mental exercise to make sure that you have good state of mind to be able to deal with whatever botherings or nuisance or fears that come to your mind, whether it be some forms of lopa, tosa, or moha that come to your mind. So you have to have regular practice as if you do regular exercise. In my case, I do meditation. I meditate every day, at least for half an hour a day. Just do chanting and meditation. And on weekends, when I have more time, I would spend more time doing meditation, listening to Dhamma, and also finding times to go into meditation retreat. That's when you have to basically separate yourself from the holy problems that you have, the worldly problems that you have to deal with, and that has been very helpful in my case. When I had to encounter very difficult situations, complex situations, just provide some meditation space for my own self, and just at least checking before making decisions about the stage of my own mind at that time. Even that, it's just like bringing your thinking, bringing your mind to your own self. I think that's very important to check that before making whatever decisions. You have the right state of mind for making such decision.
Thank you, Dr. Veerathai. I want to ask the same question from Dr. Wijewardena. You have worked with many governors, and you have been yourself making very critical decisions and advising those governors on serious junctions in Sri Lankan economy. What do you follow? How do you take care of to make sure that, as you very correctly said, being negative and being positive it's the same side, it's the two sides on the same coin, but you have to make sure that you are in the middle path. What do you do?
Well, of course, because now, right at the beginning, Dr. Veerathai told us that the main function of the central bank is to protect the money that we are holding. So it has a very, very serious obligation towards the nation. But to do that, Dhananath, you must be a person like the Buddha, because you cannot, take sides. You must be a good learner. At the same time, you must be a good practitioner and you have to listen to all the people and you have to see beyond your eyes and you must see actually not what is being seen today, what is to be foreseen in the future also. That's why I said, the complex nature of an economy with interconnectedness and the interdependence will have to be learned by not only the governor of the central bank, but by all the central bankers. That is a must. But to do that, they must be a good learner. And there is a very good discourse by the Buddha in the Anguttara Nikaya. He had actually referred to the quality of a good learner. The quality of a good learner, number one, Dhananath, is that he must learn more and more dharma. In today's world, he must know more and more subjects, more and more sciences. Second one is he must continue to reflect on them, which Dr. Veerathai told us, he does this 30-minute meditation in the morning every day, which what he does is he reflects on what has been taken into center. Third one is he must actually not only reflecting them, he must be able to tell it to another person in his own words. Because unless, Dhananath, if we are able to tell what we know in our own language, in our own words to another person, that knowledge is not ours, it is an alien knowledge. Fourth one is the most important thing. The Buddha has said, a good learner will have to see beyond what he has learned. Now, these are the qualities of a central bank. I mean, central bank, not only the governor, the deputy governor, all the workers in the central bank will have to establish quality. They are doing it because that is why in the case of our own central bank, I can tell you, my colleagues in the central bank had been lifelong learners. They don't stop learning. Now, sometimes you might think that once you pass this examination or that examination, you'll stop learning. No, because the world is changing so fast. Whatever we had learned yesterday has become obsolete today. And also what we learn today will be obsolete tomorrow. So therefore, the job of a central bank is to keep learning. But the most important thing, as Buddha has said, see beyond what you have learned. That's the most important thing.
Thank you, Dr. Wijewardena. Dr. Veerathai, I want to drift our conversation towards the sustainability as well, since that's one of the main concepts in Buddhism. How do you see this together? Because now the word sustainability has been often used in many business and economic context. What's the take? What's the connection between Buddhism and sustainability? How do you see
it? Definitely there's a lot of connections between Buddhism and the practice of sustainability that one should look at nowadays. If you look at the problems that we have, whether it's about climate change, whether it's about social inequality, issues about improper governance that we have to deal with. If one knows how to understand interconnectedness between your own actions and the society surrounding you and the world at large, if you pay enough attention on that interconnectedness and the cause and effect, which the Buddha has always says, the principles of cause and effect is very important. And your behavior may change. And it's the same as in the concept of economics. Anyone who studies microeconomics we have to study the principles of externality. When you have negative externality, it's not optimum. You have to find ways to rein in your behaviors. If not, you have to use different types of economic tools, different types of taxes, pricing mechanisms, just to get people to incorporate negative externality into their own decisions. Is the same. Again, this goes back to the issues of value that I mentioned earlier. If anyone who understands interconnectedness understands whether your actions would have any exploitation on your own self or the people surrounding you or the society, then you will appreciate those adverse consequences and would change the way you live your life. So I see these concepts that the Lord Buddha emphasized in his teachings, providing foundations for the current practice of sustainability that is becoming very, very popular. And indeed, I think it's a necessity to deal with the current challenges that the world is facing.
Thank you, Dr. Veerathai. Dr. Wijewardena, I want to ask you now, in Sri Lankan context, people see to an extent that owning by the state, because maybe we had kings and where they have been taken care of the people and they have been a center point in the administrative system, that state owning is somewhat endorsed by Buddhism, and also the concept of self-sufficiency, that we can do everything and we should not sometimes trade with other countries. It's the interest of the country is also connected with Buddhism, and there are some complicated thinking patterns we see in Sri Lanka. How do you see it, and what is your view with connected to Buddhism on these matters?
Well, Dhananath, both the things that you have just mentioned are not what the Buddha has taught. They are just, things that we had actually taken into our system for our own selfish motives, nothing else. What the Buddha has said, if you look at all the Jataka stories, there are no kings who are doing trading there in the Jataka. So they are merchants. And there are, various kinds of, Situvaru who are bankers at that time. And those Situvaru are they are all private people, not the people who are connected to the king. In fact, what Buddha has said about the wealth making is that a person will have to make wealth just like an ant is building an anthill. After making the wealth, he has to take precautions to preserve it from the robbers, from the natural disasters, from the unpalatable children, and also from the king. He had very, very correct, very clearly said the king will, steal your wealth. So therefore, you have to protect it from the king. So actually, what was preached by the Buddha had been a market which had been ruled by the private sector. A good example is in the Jataka stories, Dhananath, we have a Jataka called Chullasetti Jataka. The Chullasetti Jataka, there was this little poor boy who had heard one of the bankers, the Situvaru, one of the bankers, telling another person while he was going on the road, there was a dead rattan. He had said, a good enterprising man can even make millions out of this dead rat. So that particular poor boy had, heard of this. He collected the dead rat. When he was taking the dead rat, there was a man who wanted, it was a poor day. As a result, there was no meat and his cat was hungry. And therefore, that person actually bought the dead rat. Now, that poor boy didn't give it, nothing. He actually exchanged it for money. Then that money was used by him, by using all the types of economic principles that we teach to students. The economics and information, network building, everything. And one good example is, on one particular day, there had been a storm and the king's garden, all the mango trees had fallen. On the same day, the king's kitchen, the chef didn't have firewood. There's a communication gap. So what this particular boy did was, he got the little children who were playing in the street. He gave them, seeds. He told them, I have given you seeds now. You must do something for me. What is it? You must, collect the woods in the gardens. Then he went to the kitchen and told the chef, I will supply you with firewood. He told the gardener, I will clean your garden if you give me the wood free of charge. He told the chef, I will give you firewood if you pay me. And he got the little children to work for him and collect it. That is only one example. So likewise, finally, he became one of the richest men in India. So likewise, what Buddha had actually talked about is an economy ruled by the private sector, private initiatives, and the private individuals. But there is a constraint to that, as Dr. Veerathai has said about the sustainability. For that purpose, Dhananath, we have to make use of the resources to the full maximum use. Good example is provided in Advocata. This queen of King Ujjaini was Samavati, and Samavati had invited Bhikkhu Ananda. Bhikkhu Ananda was the first aide to the Buddha, to an almsgiving, and offered him 500 silk robes. And Bhikkhu Ananda had accepted it. But later on, he was criticized that he was a greedy man. So why should he? I mean, you need only one robe, and why have accepted 500 robes? And you are a greedy man, and you don't follow the Buddha. But the Ananda had said, very, very interesting thing. He said, what we do is, we will wear the silk robes, but what we wear right now, we will give it to the other Buddhist priests. Then here the question was asked, what do they do with the robes that they are already wearing? Then he has said, those robes can be used as bed sheets. Then what do they do with the bed sheets that they are having? Then he has said, those bed sheets will be used as doormats. Then what do you do with the present doormats? Then he had said, we will mix up with clay and put them inside the holes in the houses that we live, so that we are insulated from the cold weather in the winter. So what it means is the recycling. What we actually teach to the modern day students in economics, recycling. We are using the resources to the maximum use until such time that resource completely gets, it disappears from the system. So that is what is known as sustainability, and that is what is known as the private sector economy. And those are the things that had been preached by the Buddha. In fact, most of the Jataka stories, we find the traders traveling from one country to another with goods in caravans. There's no restriction on trade at that time. There's nothing. So those are, Dhananath, the things that, we must be self-sufficient. We must not do trade with other countries. Those are the things that we have created in ourselves for our own selfish, greedy motives.
Thank you, Dr. Wijewardena. Yes, Dr. Veerathai.
On this question, I think it is very important, and it has been misinterpreted many times when people look at Buddhism and think that self-sufficiency is the Buddhist way, and try to apply that to the way a country should follow, as an economy should follow. In my view, the way I look at Buddhism provides guiding principles starting from the individual person level. Okay, and it has to make sure that people know how to be sufficient, moderate. Okay, being sufficient doesn't mean that you have to be self-sufficient. And if you look at the countries that have adopted self-sufficiency principle or claim to follow that path, the welfare of the people has not improved, and most of the cases. Is a top-down approach, and that go against the human nature, that didn't basically use all the resources to the full potential of the society, of the economy. And obviously there had been a lot of exploitations, rent-seeking involved in those society. The beauty of Buddhism is that it has to start from the personal level of each person in the society. We have seen societies or communities that practice Buddhism, and the members of the communities, they value the concept of Buddhism. They can trade, they can generate, produce products up to the full potential, without exploiting their own self, without exploiting the environment, without exploiting the society, and have better quality of life, better standards of living. Okay, if you look at the Western organizational management literature nowadays, you see increasing interest in the concept of mindfulness organization. trying to create organizations that people are conscious about the action, people are mindful about whatever they do, to create empathy within the organization, so that suffering of people in organizations we get reduced over time, and people will be able to generate together, combine positive forces to move the organization forward. When you talk about mindfulness organization, you can't expect a company to be mindful. It has to be employees of the company, each person in the company, to cultivate mindfulness, and the effects will be at the organization level. The reason I mentioned this is an analogy to a society that says we should follow self-sufficiency approach, be reliance on your own self. They expect from the top down level, from the macro level, and hope that will generate the better well-being of the people. I don't think that the Buddhist way. It has to start from each person. If they have realization, if they have appreciation on the concepts of Buddhism and cultivate mindfulness, cultivate moderation into their way of life, then the society as a whole will become better, which doesn't need to be self-sufficient.
Thank you, Dr. Veerathai. One last question to Dr. Wijewardena. Again, coming to some of the misperceptions. This concept of profit seen sometimes as a sin in some of the Asian societies, and also some of the sin trades like selling alcohol. How do you see it with Buddhism? Very quickly, since we are running out of time.
Well, of course, the profit is actually acceptable in Buddhism, but of course, the profits made by deceiving the other party is not acceptable. That is what is, given to us, the message given to us in the Seri Vanija Jatake. You can make the profit, but you can't deceive the other party and make profits. About the alcohol, of course, the Buddha has said alcohol, there are certain traits which the people, because you were talking about Samma Kammanta,
Yes.
So one of the things that he had said about is that there are certain traits which should not be undertaken by people: alcohol, poisons, weapons, and those are harmful to other people. And of course, in general, what he has said is any trait that would make harm to another person should not be undertaken by a true Buddhist.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Veerathai, and thank you very much, Dr. Wijewardena, for joining our podcast. And we look forward to joining with you again when we have time, maybe online, to discuss about this topic, because both countries are coming from a Buddhist background, and there's a lot of interest amongst people to understand. And I think they're confused, and I think the middle path has been taken very well. And thank you very much for your insights. If you have any final thoughts, I would like to hand over to you. Oh.
Okay, that's all right.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Wijewardena. Thank you very much, Dr. Veerathai.